Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Using Pulse Surveys to Capture Insights at the Speed of Business, presented by Workplace Dynamics. Workplace Dynamics is a leading provider of technology-based employee engagement and performance improvement solutions that help senior leaders build and sustain top workplaces. More than 11 million employees representing 33,000 organizations have trusted its workplace survey. Organizations from every major sector look to Workplace Dynamics for robust benchmark data, comprehensive software solutions, survey analytics, and workplace improvement expertise. Today's webcast will include a live Q&A session. You may submit questions at any time during the presentation using either the Questions or Chat tab. It is now my pleasure to introduce your hosts for today's presentation, Fraser Marlowe and Lisa Burke. Fraser is the head of research at Workplace Dynamics and the author of many articles and research reports on the topic of employee engagement, coaching, and leadership. Prior to leading consulting and research efforts focused on building cultures of high engagement, Fraser was head of e-commerce at GE Healthcare. Lisa Burke is a workplace consultant who has coached hundreds of companies about workplace culture, performance improvement, and workplace survey results. She is passionate about offering perspective for leadership to better understand how to effectively create engagement in and with employees throughout an organization. I'll now hand things over to Fraser to begin today's presentation. Fraser?
Well, thank you so much, Michael, and welcome everybody. Today's November the 1st, so I hope that everybody is settled in with a nice big bowl of leftover candy from last night's trick-or-treating. Lisa, welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks very much.
I hope you got some good candy last night.
I did. I'll share it with you later.
Fantastic. I'll look forward to that. So the idea for today's webinar on the topic of pulse surveys came to us after we read through the feedback from the last webinar we did. So for those of you who joined, you may recall towards the end of last month, we had a great conversation with Bob Kauser. Bob is the head of HR at Humanim. And we were talking about the transformation that Bob has experienced in his organization based on his use of Pulse and how he stays connected with what is sometimes a very dispersed workforce by using this particular approach. But several people following up from that webinar did ask us or really were hoping to get a bit more on the basics of what is a pulse survey, what is different about this approach, and maybe how they can deploy it within their own organization and talk a bit about best practices. So that's really what we wanted to focus on today, give you a quick overview of pulsing as an approach to collecting employee feedback. And certainly what we've experienced is that Pulse has been a very popular approach both with employees and with executives or managers or heads of HR. And certainly we hope to convey some of that today in our presentation. And I think it's popular with employees because it really is a light touch. It is an easy way of providing people with a voice inside the organization. And I think as employees, we appreciate that. We really do like the opportunity to essentially provide some guidance, some direction, or some input on some of the key questions that the organization is facing. And we certainly know, it's often positioned as a generational conversation, but I think employees of all ages, I'm certainly not a Gen Yer myself, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity really to think about an issue that's going on inside the organization and to provide some feedback and input on that.
And I can tell you that when I'm able to provide feedback and something actually happens based on that, I'm much more vested and engaged in making that come to life.
Absolutely. So from an employee perspective, we find that it's a very engaging process. And from the managerial or the executive level, we also find that there's a strong appreciation for the tool because it does provide a mechanism for getting reliable feedback, which, as we know as managers, is not always easy to come across. But you do get the feedback very quickly, as we'll demonstrate. And it's a lot more time efficient than many of the other approaches that we might use, like one-on-ones or organizing a town hall. Or if you really want to dig into a specific topic, it really is a fantastic tool for that. And it allows us as managers or as executives to identify issues and then address those before they become major obstacles to delivering on the strategy. So that's really our agenda for today, right? We're going to explore how pulse surveys differ from a traditional annual survey. We'll look at some of the topics that a pulse approach allows us to explore. And we're also going to share with you some best practice and things to consider if you really want to deploy this tool internally and make use of it. But we also wanted to give you much more of a practical walkthrough and share with you what one of these tools looks like. So delighted to have Lisa here, who will walk us through a quick demo of the system in the second half of the presentation.
Exactly, and I'll be showing you what an employee sees, but also what the champion sees. So how you can actually administer the details of the tool.
Fantastic. And we hope to manage our time as well as we can and allow for 5-10 minutes at the end to answer your questions. So as they come to mind as we go through this, please do add them into the Q&A section, and then we'll get to those at the end. So I think maybe a helpful start to our conversation is to recap a traditional employee engagement survey. Now, these have become a very core part of the strategy in most organizations. We see organizations conducting these semi-annually, maybe sometimes every couple of years. But I think it's fair to say that for most organizations, an annual cycle has proven to be the best in terms of keeping a regular cadence. And it will involve somewhere between 12 and 40 questions. It looks at many aspects of work, many different aspects of culture. But the real point here is that an annual survey represents a concerted, one-time effort by a dedicated team who are going to plan the survey effort. They're going to roll it out. They're going to promote it so that people are very much aware and look out for it, so we get a high response rate. They collect the responses, we digest the results, and then we communicate them out and work with manager on action planning. So all told, for most organizations, this activity can easily span a couple of months. Is that?
Certainly, absolutely, yeah.
So the ambition with the annual survey really is to be very comprehensive, to look at multiple factors at once, and to get a really solid snapshot of the organization at one point in time. And it's not rare with an annual survey, if it's well executed, to get response rates of around 85% plus.
That's correct.
So that really does give us that comprehensive picture. Now, at the same time, annual surveys to an employee, they can feel a little bit like a one-way conversation. Right? Sometimes, I know when I take these, I'm delighted to provide the feedback, to go through and think about it. We often get feedback from employees that the questions themselves provoke a lot of thinking and reflection on the state of the organization and how they relate to it. But you also somewhat get the feel that maybe this exercise is more in the company's interests than in the interest of the individual employee. And despite best efforts, there's usually a delay of a few weeks before the employees see any kind of results or movement from senior leadership. It does take some pondering time. You have to get people together and give this some concerted thought. And when the results are digested and communicated out, there's always this risk that it looks pretty macro. It looks like we're looking at things on a macro level. The discussion tends to focus on high-level themes around culture and direction. And there is this risk that it feels a bit disconnected from the day-to-day work and for what's going on in my reality right now in my particular job.
Right. It sometimes can feel less tangible to connecting to what I'm doing every day at my desk.
Absolutely. So in contrast to the annual survey, where does the pulse survey really fit in? And with the pulse survey, we're talking about regular questions that will be sent out by email or by SMS text, and we reach a broad swath of the employee population. We send these out on a regular cadence. For example, every other week seems to be a good cadence for these. But the point is, it's generally just one question. So it's very focused, it's very targeted, it's tactical. And here we're not talking about the more profound questions which take a lot of thinking about and maybe cause a bit of stress or anxiety in the organizations, like, do I trust my manager? How do I relate to the work? These are maybe questions that allow more for course correction. They may be questions which are focused on digging deeper and getting closer to the heart of an issue, which may have surfaced during the annual survey, for example. Or it may be just more tactical follow-up on things that are at the front of people's minds right now to give managers actionable insights to do course corrections and engage in dialogue as you go.
That is accurate. The other thing that this can provide is, the annual survey is capturing a snapshot of a moment in time, whereas pulse surveys can capture if there's a disconnect that's beginning to brew. Because you're asking on a regular cadence, you can actually catch that fire before it becomes something larger.
A big wildfire,
Yes.
out of control, indeed. So this is one of the reasons why progressive organizations are very interested in getting a pulse process woven into the fabric, woven into the operating system of the organization. But there are several others that I just wanted to highlight for us here. Now, I mentioned earlier how employees are generally positive when we roll out a pulse process within an organization. We get very positive engagement and feedback. And somehow employees, and funny enough, I'm one of them. I think, Lisa, you're an employee?
Yes, I am.
Fair to say. I think most people on the call today can relate to this. You do really feel involved in the process. It's this one question that comes to you. It's very easy to respond. Now, you have the option of, depending on the topic, you may just respond, yes, I agree, I somewhat agree. You may say, no, I don't agree. And you may just leave it at that, and that might be your input. But what you'll also find is that some of the questions really do make you stop and think. Maybe it's a topic that you have more passion about personally, right? And then there's an opportunity for you to jump in, get more involved in a two-way dialogue, which often will run right up and down the organization. And it's quite impressive to see that when grassroots ideas emerge through Pulse and very rapidly catch fire. And we'll demonstrate that a little bit of how that mechanism works without contradicting the anonymity of the process. But from the management's perspective, and I happen to be a manager, and I'm sure many of the people on the call also manage people, it really does provide you with real-time, candid feedback, which is anonymous, so you can trust it. And it does allow you, when appropriate, to engage in your side of that two-way conversation.
I can I can't count on my two hands the number of times that someone who is the head of HR in an annual survey said, well, I just wish I could start the conversation and ask a person why they left this specific comment. It's broad, it's vague. This is a way that you can have that two-way dialogue that's anonymous.
And I'm sure you'll show us how that works.
I will.
When we get to the demo.
Yes.
Fantastic. Now, of course, you're picking new topics to explore on each cycle, and you can decide how often you do this. As I say, every 2 weeks, maybe every week. So by soliciting feedback really at the speed of business, as issues arise within the organization or as you are focusing on different topics, it allows you to rotate through the questions, which means that employees, you get engagement from different parts of the employee population depending on the topic that's running, and that's quite interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope at a high level this does provide you with some of the insights into why progressive organizations are actually relying both on an annual survey to dig deep and to take stock of how the organization is doing, but also running a pulse questions throughout the year so that they can track in real time the hot topics of the day or dig deeper on key issues that might need managerial attention right now. So Lisa, with your experience around this, could you elaborate for us a little bit on how you might go from the annual survey into Pulse and connect the two?
Certainly. So for instance, we have an example here of the theme of efficiency. On our annual survey, we actually ask a specific statement about doing things efficiently and well. So on the annual survey, you're getting, again, just that snapshot of a moment in time. When we use Pulse, you can actually unpack that efficiency theme. We have a library of questions. We work with organizations on deciding which questions might really target what they're looking at. And that's because we can analyze their annual survey results and then help unpack that.
And just to be clear, while here we're talking about a follow-on from an annual survey, you're not limited to that, right?
Certainly not. It can be any organization who just knows that there's an issue, for instance, with efficiency or collaboration, and we can dig deeper into that, again, using our library of questions.
Right. I mean, I've often talked to senior teams who have said to me, and I think it's a valid point, we don't really need an annual survey to tell us that we have certain areas we need to explore. We could jump in now. We've been working on it for a while, but we're still not quite getting the feedback we need from employees, particularly when there's some tension in the organization or a level of trust that's not there. So Pulse could be used for that.
It certainly could, and I'll tell you that one of the speed bumps that we have heard from other organizations who are trying to do it is that when they do it internally, there's a bit of a lack of trust, as you said.
Yeah.
So they're not sure that people internally can't tell who said what, and so you don't get honest feedback or those specific recommendations, whereas using a third party can really uncover that.
Great. So before we get on to the demo, what I really wanted to share from those organizations that have been using a Pulse process for a while, what are the lessons learned and the best practices? I don't think any of these will come as a great surprise, but I think it's worth just taking them into consideration before we move on. The first is that you do need a decent level of executive support. Now, sometimes the C-suite might be cautiously supportive when they hear about the idea of pulsing the organization, and that might be fine, to take this, let's try this process, right? Let's run a few things and see what comes out of it. That's generally how organizations tend to start. But it really does help to make sure that the top management in the organization is briefed on what's going on, that this doesn't come as a big surprise, and that you've actually thought through the follow-up in advance. So depending on the size of your organization, right, and how many employees are going to jump in, typically when we first ramp this up, that the engagement is pretty quick. I mean, on the very first question, that's what we're seeing. You might need to plan and just invest some time in reading through and handling the comments.
Right.
That's one area where you do have to have some resources. Now, I think the trick here is that having many hands on deck makes for light work. So it's a good idea to have several people, maybe on a tiger team, representing different departments who can help with reviewing comments.
I would say, too, that one of the things that our research has shown from any survey, if an employee is giving feedback, the two things they want to know is that their voice is heard and that action is being taken. So if no one's handling the comments, employees are just seeing them kind of go into the ethers and disappear. But we make it easy to handle those comments, and we'll show that soon.
So the high-level numbers that may come back from asking a question to the organization are very informative, but the real nuggets, I think, are found in the comments. And that's really, as a manager, where now you see people who really have opinions that are representative. You can go back and you can dig into that.
And you can start that conversation back and forth in an anonymous way. Yeah.
The next point is just aligning questions with key themes. I think Lisa mentioned this. You do want to pick questions carefully. You might want to align these with the annual survey, or you may have some things that are top of mind right now that you want to jump in with. And we talked about the dialogue, the importance of making sure that you do follow up on those comments to spark two-way conversation. Now, this said, when you do start off the process, some organizations are very keen to really get to the meat of the issue, ask some pretty pointed questions, and we'd advise maybe not doing that on the first round. Maybe pick a few easier kind of softball questions, which will get people engaged and won't cause too much controversy.
That's right.
At least until you've gotten yourself accustomed to using this approach.
Yeah, we've had examples with clients who really wanted to know something that was very controversial. And as it turned out, it was something that, you know, human beings react to confrontation and controversy with fear. And so they had a lower response rate than they were hoping for. So we've helped learn the lesson already.
Yeah.
So starting off with some easy questions, yes, is a great way to start it.
And of course, we guide every client on what questions to select, how to ramp up, and that's proven ground.
Yes, we do, yes.
That's great. Great, so hopefully this was a good overview of Pulse versus an annual survey, and I think often the best way of really understanding how this works is just to walk through the solution. So Lisa, could you take us through that?
Absolutely. So we're going to start with a high-level view of what it looks like for an employee experience, and then we're going to dig into what the champion experience is, and then the specifics of how to use the actual tool. So at this point, we are looking at an organization called Green Valley, which is a fictional company. Matt Williams is the fictional employee, and we have received in our email this exact email that says, how well do leaders understand what happens at Green Valley? We're being asked to rate this statement between no answer, bad, needs to improve, good, or excellent. And he's reassured that this is anonymous. So we're going to say, we think the leaders are doing pretty well. We're going to click on the word good. That's it. That's all he needed to do to submit an answer and have it count towards a number. He also has the option to add some additional thoughts. So we can see that he can change his rating, but right now he's going to say, you know what, I think our CEO does a really good job of listening. There are two other things he can do here. So Matt can decide his level of anonymity. He can say that he's just a Green Valley employee and kind of pull back his anonymity. This is where you really get to enable an honest answer. But Matt's pretty comfortable complimenting the CEO, so he's going to select that he's a marketing employee.
So what if Matt at this point had said, at the end of his comment, signed off as Matt?
So the important thing about leaving his comment, thank you very much, is to make sure that you don't self-identify.
Right.
So for instance, if Matt sits next to Bob the Smoker, and he's leaving a comment about not liking to sit next to Bob the Smoker, but Matt's the only one who sits next to Bob the Smoker, he's revealed himself. So obviously it is as anonymous as
as common sense dictates.
As common sense dictates, exactly. So as long as someone doesn't self-reveal, it is anonymous, other than we can see that he's from the marketing department. The other thing he can do is decide whether or not he wants his comments shared in highlight reports, and we'll get to those reports in a moment. But the goal is, again, to close the loop with employee feedback. We make it very easy for you to share, including comments. If this is potentially a controversial comment, Matt might deselect, but he's comfortable with this, and so he's going to submit his comment. That is his entire experience. There are a couple of other things Matt can do. He can thank a colleague or make a suggestion. So Matt's going to thank a colleague. If I can scroll down. Sorry, there we go. And he's going to say thanks. Matt had a particularly nice interaction with Susie as a coworker, so he's left this comment for her. Now, in this section, he can include his name. He can also select a fun little icon on the left. But he's a little shy. He doesn't want to reveal himself. So he's just going to hit send. Susie's going to know that a marketing department employee thanked her. What is Susie's experience? This email shows up in her inbox that says she's got a thank you note. So she clicks view thank you and can see that the marketing department employee left her that response. What are the other options that Matt can do? He can also make a suggestion. So he selects speak up, and here we're seeing the history. So basically he's in a web app at this point, a browser has opened, and he can see the history of all the comments that he's left so far, again, anonymously. He leaves another one and hits send, and that message has gone to the champion. So now we're going to switch to the champion view.
So before we jump to
sure.
kind of the administrator side of the tool, why would we want to have the thanks and the comments built in here to the Pulse tool?
So one of the things that our research is showing is that when people are feeling appreciated, not just from management, but from each other, they become more engaged at work. Also, for suggestions, pretty much every manager wants to know how to make things better, and this is an anonymous way that employees can leave suggestions, but again, it's starting a dialogue, a conversation. So the manager can then reply and say, you know, Fraser, I think that was a great idea. I don't know that it's you. What is it that you'd like to change about, you know, your benefits package or something?
Right.
And start that conversation.
And so we're giving everybody an opportunity every week or every 2 weeks to kind of put it back at the front of people's minds. Is that the idea?
That is the idea. It's casting the wider net.
Right.
So again, on the annual survey, snapshot of a moment in time, whereas Pulse is kind of consistent, and you're able to, when it's something that's top of mind for an employee, to capture that where they can either thank someone who just did something nice, or make a suggestion about something that's, you know, either positive or negative.
Fantastic.
Great. So we're going to jump into, there we go. Sorry. Hold on one second. Technology glitch. Great, thank you. So now we're going to move into the champion's experience. So what's a champion? It can be anybody. It often is someone in HR, but the head of an organization can choose to be the champion of Workplace Pulse. Basically, their role is they are the individual who sees the results first, who disseminates the results, and who responds. Again, Fraser mentioned earlier that it could be a tiger team, so it could be a few individuals who get together, look through comments, and decide how to respond. So Laura Smith here at Green Valley has an email in her inbox that says, let's look at the results. She can't wait. And a browser opens that shows the responses. So we're seeing that for that statement about senior leaders, there is a response of 50% of the company think that it's good, the leaders are doing well, 50% think they're excellent. And we've got a 46% response rate.
So, so I do have to ask. Earlier I was talking about 85%, which is generally a target for an annual survey. So 46 seems low to me.
So you can't expect to get the same annual response rate. If you think about the annual survey, typically we're sending out reminders. You've kind of built up to it and said, hey, the survey is coming. This is something that is much more low-key and comes on a regular cadence. So again, you're catching things as they are top of mind or as they occur, a very light touch. So a typical response rate, actually we're finding, is kind of in the high 30%. So a 46% response rate for Pulse is actually very good. Great question.
So on an annual survey, the questions may stay open for a couple of weeks, and I might get 2 or 3 reminders during that period to make sure that we get as many people as possible. How long does a Pulse question stay open?
A Pulse question is usually just 48 hours. Typically, we launch early Tuesday morning, close Thursday afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can also see that there are specific comments here, and you can see how the employee rated them You can see that this person rated the statement excellent and left a comment. Here you can also see that someone unchecked that box saying that they wanted their comment to remain private. So in other words, if I wanted to share this report with all of the employees, that comment would not show up. On the right-hand side, we have an algorithm running behind the scenes, and it shows up the main themes. What does that mean? That when there are words that are showing up that are fairly common, we consider them themes, and you can dig into each of these. You could click on them, and just the comments, for instance, the 4 about development, would show up and highlight the word development. Clients find that really interesting also, to find if those 4 development comments had a green rating, so it was good, or a red rating because it was bad. You can also look at the results by individual departments. As you would click through each of these, they would show you the response rates for that specific department. Now you can also share results. By clicking on that icon of share results, you can, for instance, let's decide to send it to the IT department. You would be able to select the individuals it would go to. You can edit this comment area. These are, again, just the results from the IT department, and they include specific comments. Now, you still control which comments go out if there are some that potentially are unhelpful. They have an emoji or something. You can hit the red X, and it would show up like this, where it's kind of shaded out, but you can always undo that. And then you can go ahead and save the report and then send it out. You can also send it to everyone, or you can send it to individuals, which, for instance, might be helpful if it was a specific comment about benefits, and you could send it just to that individual who takes care of the benefits questions.
So I know as a manager here at Workplace Dynamics, I find this very useful, getting a report which is specific to our department. Even though the overall numbers are interesting to me, really to inform my thinking and my course correction at the local level. That's really the data that I need.
That's right. Excellent. Now, there are a couple of other features here in this dashboard. We can look at messages, thank a colleague, and make a suggestion. So let's start with thank a colleague. Here we're seeing that thanks to Susie, and as you scroll through, you can see all of the thanks that have come through. Again, you still have control, and if there is something that is pretending to be a thanks, you can always remove that. And there are a couple of organizations we're working with who actually copy this public link. So this is a way that you can have everybody in the organization see the thanks that everyone's giving to each other, and they'll copy it to their intranet. There's one that's copying it to their Slack channel about appreciation for each other. You can also click on the Make a Suggestion area. This is where those suggestions come through. There will be a mail icon if it's something that you've already responded to. So there are a couple of things you can do here. You can reply to the individual, or you can forward it, again, using the example of if it was specific to benefits, you might send it to that individual. But if you hit reply, it will show up as coming from you, and this is where you start that anonymous conversation back and forth with employees. You can also keep track of that here in the messages section. So for instance, there's someone who said that we were doing bad at being transparent and had a specific suggestion. Well, I'd like to look at that a little bit more. So they want to know, tell me more about why you think we have too many meetings. When I go ahead and hit send, that marketing department employee receives an email saying you have a message, and they're able to log in and see just this comment coming from the individual. Again, this is anonymous. It's explained in their email that it's anonymous, but it's a way to keep track of all the conversations you've got going back and forth.
Fantastic.
You can also, I'm going to click on the home button. This is kind of the 30,000-foot view of your entire dashboard. So you've got the current question, there are the previous questions below, and here's the upcoming question. It tells you the date and time it'll be coming out. You can also replace that question. So I'm sure a lot of people on the call today are familiar with Mad Libs. You can go through, and we highly recommend when there is a meeting, an event, an initiative, some training that you've got coming up, to pulse on that. And the reason why is, first of all, you get a higher response rate. You're also getting that immediate feedback. If the head of the organization, if my manager Fraser invested X $1,000s in training, he's going to want to know that he's getting back good feedback about that training. So you simply click into where the Mad Lib is, add your individual for instance, first quarter meeting, and go ahead and replace that question. It's now, how was our first quarter meeting?
Mm-hmm. So my options for changing the questions, if I really wanted to dig in, these are preloaded questions. What's the value of using the preloaded ones rather than just make up my own?
So the making up your own questions, as a survey company who's been in business for over a decade, the words that are used when we ask questions are really important. We have organizational, industrial psychologists who work in the backgrounds to really look at what are the right words to use. So we've tested and vetted all the statements that we ask. If there is a specific question you want to ask that isn't in the Mad Lib format, contact us and we'll work together to help you either draft a statement or use one from our library.
Right.
Great question. On the right here, you can also see the trending for response rates, and then these are the totals. So that is the basics of how to go through the online tool. As you can see on the bottom right here, for Green Valley, on their annual survey, there were 3 specific focus areas of efficiency communication up, and we helped them develop the questions that would be asked in those areas.
Fantastic.
Great.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for giving us a walkthrough of the tool.
Yeah.
Again, I hope that that's provided everybody with a bit of a feel for the tool itself. Can you maybe walk us through the process then, if we're deploying Pulse internally? What are these steps?
Certainly. So it would be the things to really hit on are that consistent cadence. Mm-hmm. So whether that's weekly or bi-weekly, and you can also ask similar statements to the survey, so you can capture trending as well. Once the question closes, you absolutely want to close the feedback loop with employees. You want them to know that it's being heard. And of course, the leaders are going to want to know, so what are the results of this? This was something we really wanted to unpack. Mm-hmm. And so they tend to be really excited about looking at the comments in particular. Creating that dialogue in the private messages, again, employees putting out a suggestion, especially if it's something that when it's anonymous, it sometimes can feel a little more risky for them. So letting them know that you appreciate their feedback and would love to have that conversation a little bit more is really helpful, and you get clarity. Yes?
And so we use Pulse internally here at Workplace Dynamics, and it's always great to hear Dr. Claffey, our CEO, at our all-hands meeting saying, we got this feedback through Pulse and we've decided to make such and such a change. We're not quite sure who suggested it, but thank you for the dialogue, and we've probably had 3 or 4 exchanges to really fine-tune what was meant by the comment, and also ask others, is this in line with what everybody is thinking? Mm-hmm. So it's really great to see that mechanism in action.
It is, absolutely. And then you've got that regular and transparent aspect to the communication, so employees know that you're listening. And then you're using those micro actions. So annual survey is the macro action. It's the getting a big team together and lots of action planning. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but another way to eat the elephant is one bite at a time. So this is where the micro actions really help not only the employees connect to actions that are being taken and how it's something that's happening at their desk, but also to the leaders and the big picture strategy of where the organization is going.
Great. So that essentially wraps up the tour of the tool and the concept behind Pulse. Now, we've left some time here to answer any questions that you might have, and we'd be more than happy to handle all of those. Those that we can answer now in the next 10 minutes or so, we'll be happy to take. And if we can't get to all of them, then we certainly are committed to following up by email, which we always like to do. So, Michael, I'll turn it back over to you if you could walk us through some of the questions that have come in.
Thank you, Fraser. We received a lot of great questions during the presentation, both about the tool itself and the concept of pulse surveying. The first one we have in is from Lee. Can employees be given access to the survey tool to view results to a question if the company chooses versus having a team or champion have to intercede to send results out?
Great question. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Michael. No, we don't tend to give access to the tool to employees. The reason for that is obviously that someone who is an HR champion typically knows how to kind of look through and vet the questions for things that are helpful. And if it's something unhelpful or someone who's having a really difficult moment, an HR person has been trained to know how to deal with that. Not necessarily every employee has been. How do employees find out about it? That's the share results feature. So we're able to quickly create reports, and that's why you want to keep the reports going out every time you ask a question. Share the results with all the employees.
Mm-hmm. Organizations that really have embraced kind of a high level of transparency, and I think organizations know in their culture if that's the right thing to do or not, do use the public link, which Lisa mentioned, so you can see those comments coming through as they get reported out. And shortly after you've answered the question, a day or two after, every employee will get that report from their manager, assuming that the numbers get shared out, which they should. So you will see the numbers for either your department or the company as a whole.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is from Heather. An important part of any survey is to show actions related to survey responses. With the weekly or biweekly pulse, how do you manage expectations around resulting actions?
That's a great question. So probably at the outset, when you're sharing the results, the HR champion, and that could include the leader, is going to send a little note. Oftentimes, I'll give an example from here when we use it. It's something that we're going to create a focus group about this item that was controversial and find out, potentially how widespread something is or how we're going to move forward with action. And that really helps set expectations for employees.
I think Pulse is a very different cadence and there's a different level of expectation compared to an annual survey. I know as a manager who's been involved in this process a lot, when you get the digest from the annual survey, there's a lot of things to unpack and to walk through as a group. And that can be slightly intimidating, and you feel like you've left lots of important things on the table. But with Pulse, because it is so focused and it is a different cadence, what you find is that managers will bring those topics to the table, on a weekly or a bi-weekly cadence with their own team and say, thanks for your feedback on the Pulse question. It tends to generate just ongoing conversation. So I think while the annual survey is kind of taking a snapshot in time and deliberating over some big changes, Pulse is much more around micro kind of course correction and managers taking those on board, correcting their course as they go. So it's not about revolution, it's much more about evolution.
Great point.
Great, and we have a related question from Jennifer. What are some of the risks or potential pitfalls for pulse surveying like this?
We're competing over who gets to answer first. I would say that one of the biggest ones has been not having senior leader buy-in. So unfortunately, when a leader wants to kind of keep results quiet or is really wanting to think through for, a month or so how to respond to something, that's very ineffective. So that would be my number one.
Interestingly, my comment would be the flip side of that. I think we've had lots of organizations who have jumped in feet first in the deep end, been very keen to deploy the tool, been very keen to dig deep. I would say some organizations with senior leader support have tried to run questions every week, have underestimated the amount of involvement and feedback that they will receive, which is a very positive thing. But I think starting with a cadence of maybe every other week, and as we mentioned, some easier to digest questions at the beginning will allow you to ramp up.
Great point. Yep.
Great. We got a couple of questions that are related from Christina and Joanne. What size company is this valuable for, and how important is it to make sure that we don't have the same people filling out these surveys each time? So is there a risk that you'll only be hearing from the squeaky wheels and not get a full sense from those who are engaged or satisfied?
Yep. So let me tackle the organizational size question first. It's interesting that you would think an organization of, say, 50 or 60 people who are all on the same site wouldn't need a tool like Pulse. I mean, you can walk around the office, you can look people in the eye, and yet we're finding that those small organizations get a lot of benefit out of it. There can still be lots of issues under the water, rippling under the water, that are hard to tease out for a senior leader. As you get to a much larger organization, as things scale up, of course, the volume of information you're going to get in is going to multiply up. So the only real difference, while it's valuable across the board, the real difference is you do need more structure, you need more champions involved in the process. And you may decide actually to structure Pulse either based on, for example, your major sites or your major departments, and not to kind of structure it that way.
I would say also that larger organizations we've been working with are finding that by giving a manager access to the dashboard, to the tool, that they are able to, once there's been a learning curve and potentially a little bit of alignment among the manager and HR groups, that they just run with it. So a little bit of a ramp up and a learning curve, but once that's done, to just handle it from that manager level is very manageable.
So let me also address the second point in the question, which is how do we make sure we don't have just the same people involved? And we know, for example, from social media, some people are really into social media and will answer every single time, and some people just don't go near it. So there is a personality difference. And what we have found is that when you study the response rates by department, as you see those coming in, you can deliberately shift some questions towards topics where you're getting lower response or involvement. So the trick is in making sure that you're not just staying on general topics. And by changing that round, you're able to target specific populations and bring them into the fold. Often it's the kind of more introverted, less socially media-friendly folks in the organization that you really want to hear from, particularly people who are introverted, who really appreciate having this tool at their disposal so they can have a voice.
I would also suggest that once you close the loop with employees, that is the best thing you can do, because that's what encourages people who are quiet or who are waiting for the whiners to get out of the way, maybe. It's the way that they know that it's safe for them to enter the water as well. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, we'll have to trademark this. But let's say it's trademarked. But we've heard this described as the open door policy for the digital age. And I very much like that expression. It does capture Pulse quite nicely.
The next question we have is from Brent. What do you do about employee populations that are in the field and don't use email regularly?
I would call it a stumbling block. But my experience has been so far that we are becoming a world that really does communicate much more through email. There is an aspect to the SMX text version that we're developing, so likely that will be next. But the upcoming recruiting is mostly from the millennials, and they are really well versed in email and have an expectation around that as well.
Yeah.
So progressive companies are learning that they need to enter that aspect.
So Bob Causa on the webinar had that very same challenge. So he had a very dispersed population, people who would join the company for kind of short bursts of time because of the nature of the work that they do. But there are some legal ramifications to storing people's emails or using personal emails and getting them involved in this process. So we are working with organizations right now who are trying to tackle that nut, crack that nut. It has several facets to it. We're not quite there yet, but I think we'll have a solution relatively soon.
We have another question from Christina. Have you experienced survey fatigue when surveying too often, and how do you combat that?
Great question, Christina. It's actually one of the most frequently asked questions we get. I'm going to let Fraser take a first stab at that.
You know, my thinking on that is today if I take a flight or I stay at a hotel, shortly thereafter I'm getting an email asking me how I enjoyed my stay or was the flight on time. I feel sometimes more connected to my coffee store than I do to the company that I work for 200 plus days a year. So no, we're not really experiencing survey fatigue. Quite the opposite. We're experiencing a thirst for people to be part of that community at work, to be given a voice. I think survey fatigue does kick in when you have long, elaborate surveys which take a lot of time. This takes about as much time as it takes to open an email, and therefore Pulse does not feel like an additional reporting burden added to everybody's workload.
I would also add that in my personal experience, I confess there have been times I've seen a Pulse question come through my email that I didn't answer because it didn't particularly interest me. But when there is one that interests me or I've had an experience, I'm grateful because now I get an opportunity to really register my voice and have my opinion matter. So again, if you think about it as casting a wide net on a consistent basis, that does not result in survey fatigue. It results in employees being grateful to have the opportunity to speak something that they've wanted to say.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question is from David. What kind of issues surface most often in these Pulse surveys? What do you consider micro?
Okay, so I'll start with what comes up the most often. I would say that it's by and large really positive feedback, and that's from my experience of the past year or so of working with clients very closely. What do I consider micro? So small actions, it really is that closing the loop with the one individual who was, for instance, complaining about their benefits. And it often results in being able to say, oh, I guess you didn't know that we had this. So it's another communication opportunity. It isn't often a huge chasm that someone's trying to jump across. It's something much smaller. So not only do they tend to be kind of smaller issues, but again, something that's kind of brewing below the surface, but also smaller solutions, so much easier to handle as well.
Maybe I'll chime in with an example from a financial services client that we've worked with. And the topic they were having is they found themselves having lots of internal meetings and people were complaining about it and saying it really ate into their productivity. So they carved out specific times of the day when people would work without interruption. And that seemed to work pretty well, and they used a pulse question to say, you know, how is this interruption-free period working for you? And the results were kind of mixed. Some departments had really embraced it, some hadn't embraced it. Some people weren't respecting it, so it wasn't working very well. And through a cycle of 2 different questions, using this, they were able to do essentially micro actions, which was to enable each manager in each department to figure out what would work locally for their team and just coordinate that so it made sense across the organization, but at the micro level for those 10, 12, 20 people in that one department, they could identify why this hadn't really taken off, whether it was still worth pursuing, and if it was worth pursuing, how they would implement it. Now that sounds like something you could get 12 or 20 people together on a weekly meeting and say, how are we going to do this? But how would you coordinate that across the entire organization all at once? And so this is a great mechanism for achieving that type of micro action.
Great. I think we have time for one final question here. This is another one from Brent. In a very large organization with lots of different offices and lots of different teams, does it make sense to do this type of pulse surveying centrally, or should it be allocated to different departments or different offices? How do you suggest managing that most effectively?
So I would suggest that you have different cycles. You may have some questions which are pertinent across the board. So those would be run on the platform centrally. But you can allow local managers to say, you know, that question is not terribly relevant to my department, or is completely irrelevant to my department. You know, you may have, for one example, right, there was questions around a change in policy around reimbursement for travel expenses. Well, for 80% of the employees, that was kind of irrelevant, but for the 20% who traveled a lot, it was very pertinent. So that's an example where you just want to look at the question and ask yourself, is that something that makes sense for the entire audience, or should we just divide it down? And you can do that quite easily.
Thank you so much. So Fraser and Lisa, that was a wonderful presentation, and that will conclude today's presentation. Thank you very much to our presenters and attendees for joining us today. We will be sending you a link to view the recording of this webinar, so please be sure to look out for that email in the next few days. When you exit the webinar, a brief survey will pop up. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for future presentations. For more information about Workplace Dynamics and to find more content about employee engagement, please visit our website at workplacedynamics.com. We look forward to hosting you at a future event.